lapping of waves. The church kept a well-tended public garden with flecked benches and a stone statue of the Virgin that was painted each year after winter ended. Winters pulled the paint away from the Madonna's profile, leaving a flaked heap of aging stone that resembled something primitive. The villagers never thought to cover the statue when the ice and snow began. Instead, they seemed to feel an odd pride at what the elements had done to the Mother of God. Our mother and father had little faith when it came to the village. We never prayed or celebrated holidays at St. Mary's Star of the Sea. For years, Mama and Daddy had repeated that they'd only settled in Salt Point, Maine, because of my father's good job. He was a teacher. Our parents had been able to purchase a few acres that nobody else wanted, set farther inland, away from the sea. But I knew there were other reasons, too. After my older sister Ezra's birth, my parents wanted to leave Damascus for a place that knew nothing of the kindred tragedy. In Salt Point, no one would remind my father of his grandparents' ambitions. They would not bother to question the loss of Daddy's left arm, because there were fishermen in the village who were also missing legs, arms, faith, and eyes. My father's headstrong youth, somewhere in the South, would be of no interest to anyone in New England, nor would they connect it to his lack of capacity for rage or trouble of any kind. My father believed that grace and dignity must be earned by the life a man lived. He scorned the idea of an unknown father whose face he had never glimpsed except in fire and brimstone. Perhaps my father didn't know how to look for such a father, since he'd never met his own. Daddy had to recognize his own face. Still, he couldn't make up his mind about heaven or resurrections. We lived in a place where our faces wouldn't have been welcomed by the villagers at Mass on Sunday mornings. There were whole years when my father refused to kneel to a God who'd taken his arm in the life of his young brother, whom he refused to speak about. We'd only heard our uncle's name spoken when my father shouted himself awake from his nightmares. Our mother said Daddy blamed himself, even though anyone would have chalked up the tragedy to foolishness. The only place my father was not fearful was inside the pages of the books he loved and taught. Beyond the church, the village consisted of incomplete, asymmetric rows of houses, most of which shared small yards filled with wild chickens, iridescent cocks, goats tied to posts, sagging clotheslines, and stingy vegetable patches. At the farthest end of the main street, away from St. Mary's Star of the Sea, was another cluster of essential buildings: the bar, the beauty parlor, and a small plaza of rented offices. These blanched buildings faced a lot that was transformed into a fresh air market on Saturdays. During the summers, the lot was sometimes used for carnivals, antiques fairs, and a traveling circus that featured a marvelous freak show. When the lot wasn't being rented, it was a place where teenagers raced cars and scowled, aware that more than likely they'd all eventually marry one another. Beyond the empty lot, the land curved like a bony finger towards the sea. This wild ground was ash and gravel. Away from the main street and church, it was where villagers yielded their true selves to the raw air. It was the ideal place for picnics, lovers, children's games, arguments, and solitary hours of determined fishing and drinking. At the very end of the point was a squat cement lighthouse that no longer functioned. Rheumatic trees, blown backwards by sea winds, marked the length of the bluffs. The physical meanness of the land gave no warning of its steep cliffs, which was something my parents were always nervous about. We lived where the land was only slightly softer, but more abandoned, nestled in the woods that led up towards the highest bluff.